Ladies and gentlemen, what the judge just read to you is called a jury charge. It's essentially the law that applies in this case. It's the law that's going to guide you during your deliberations. And the state, like the judge said, has the burden of proving this. The law in a moment, but because we have the burden of proof, you'll hear from me, then you'll hear from the defense, and then you'll hear from Ms. Long. Because we have the burden of proof, the law says we go first and we go last. In a moment, we're going to talk about the law. But for a brief moment, let's take a breather. Last week was a long week. You heard a lot of testimony, up until Friday afternoon at 5 p.m. Look around. These are your fellow jurors. Each of you individually is from a different background, different occupation, different job, live in different places of our community. But the 14 of you together represent Harris County. The 14 of you will walk out of this room, and you don't walk into individual voting booths, vote guilty, or you vote not guilty, slip it into a ballot, and then walk right on out. No, your duty is to deliberate. And deliberations are going to start with some of you maybe not recalling some testimony as well as some fellow jurors do. Not recalling some of the evidence as well as other jurors do. But that's why it's your duty to deliberate, talk, discuss. Remember what the evidence told you. Now, let's talk about the law. This is 8 pages long. Go to page 2. Because the only thing in question is whether or not he had the conscious objective or desire to commit the offense of murder. Because we all know that on September 29th, Benjamin Elliott walked into his sister's room with this very knife, and he stabbed her in the neck twice. Everybody in this courtroom knows that. The question is, did he have the conscious objective or desire, the intent, to commit murder? That's on the second page of the jury charge. The question is, did the state prove to you the elements of the offense beyond a reasonable doubt? You know what one word is nowhere, anywhere inside of this jury charge? Motive. Because in jury selection, we told you, our duty is to prove the elements of the offense to you beyond a reasonable doubt. And motive is not an element of the offense. And every one of you said, if the state proved to you the elements of the offense beyond a reasonable doubt, even without knowing the motive, you would render a guilty verdict. So when you guys go back there and you start talking and somebody brings up motive in the context of reasonable doubt, it is your duty to shut them down. We're talking about the elements of the offense. We all know what the defendant's conscious objective and desire was. He calls 911 and he says, I killed my sister. He says, I stabbed her. And he is whispering. You know how we know he was whispering? Because Michael Elliott, his own father, took that witness stand and said, it was the 911 operator's voice that woke him up, not Benjamin. It was the 911 operator's voice that led him to walk into that room, not Benjamin. And when he walked into that room, Meghan Elliott's laying in the bed and her face is gray. The 911 call tells you what his conscious objective desire was. That he knew he stabbed his sister and he knew she was dead. That's it. But let's talk about the scene, because when they walk him out of that house in handcuffs, the scene itself tells the story. The sheath of the knife is on his bed. The knife is laying next to Meghan's head. He stabbed her in her jugular vein. You heard from Dr. Fadden. A stab wound like that is going to spray blood across the room at the rate that the heart is pumping. Guess what we don't see anywhere in her room? Blood spatter. Except for 3 little drops that came from the knife after he ripped it out of her neck. There's no blood spraying in the room. You know why? The only thing soaked in blood is the pillow that he muffled her screams with. It wasn't her voice that woke her parents. No one heard her scream. Not a single person. That's the scene. Let's talk about his statement. In voir dire, we asked you guys, in jury selection, we asked you, why would we play the defendant's statement to you if we don't believe it to be true and it's self-serving? I'll tell you why. Now you get to know why. We wanted you to see Benjamin Elliott for who he was on that day. Not the 12-year-old that fell asleep eating a donut. No, Benjamin Elliott, at 17 years old, is sitting in this room with Deputy Munoz at the Harris County Sheriff's Office Homicide Division after just stabbing his sister twice in the neck. And he's casually sitting in a chair, and he's sipping water, and he's chatting it up about the SAT coming up on Saturday. Now, defense is going to argue, well, Deputy Munoz never told him that Meghan was dead. But we know why he perked up that day in that interview room. It's because of the knife. It's because of the fact that Deputy Munoz asked him about the knife. He got excited. He got giddy about the knife that he used to stab his sister. But that's actually not the order of the questions. They're going to argue that it's because Deputy Munoz didn't tell him that Meghan was dead. I don't want to argue with you guys about anything but the facts. Fact. Deputy Munoz asked the defendant, what do you remember last? And he says, I remember the feeling of stabbing something, and then I heard a gargle or a half scream. Those were his words. And then Deputy Munoz asked him, where was Meghan? And the reason why Deputy Munoz asked him, where's Meghan, isn't because he wasn't sure where Meghan was. He wanted to know, is Meghan laying down? Is Meghan sitting up? What was Meghan doing when you stabbed her in the neck and you heard the gargle and the scream? He says she was stabbed. Well, that's quite strange, but okay. Well, let me ask you this. That knife that you used to stab your sister, that you just described to us, that you used to stab your sister, was that your knife? And he says, I was enamored by it twice. The same knife that he just told us he used to stab his sister, he says in that interview, I was enamored by it. And then Deputy Munoz asked him, that phone, your phone that you used to call 911, you mind if we take a look at it and make sure we can confirm the 911 call? He says, yeah. Where's that phone? And he responds, at 17 years old, the crime scene. He told you it was a crime. He told you that. Those were his words. And then Deputy Munoz asked him to fill out the consent form. And we're going to publish this for you. This is State's Exhibit number 100. You see where it says...
This is one of those cases that's really anybody's case. You can see how this case could go either way. We'll hit pause. You'll hear all of the states open and then, or the states close rather, and then the defense closing arguments next. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Ted Rowlands. Good to be with you on a Monday. Kicking off another week here, another busy week. We're in several courtrooms across the country, as always, in Texas. Closing arguments just getting underway in the Sleepwalker twin murder trial for Benjamin Elliott. We'll get back to court in just a minute. In Florida, day one of a new trial. Father accused of murdering his 5-year-old daughter and attempting to murder his 8-year-old son, Jermaine Bass. Initially told police he accidentally shot the kids. Now the defense claims he didn't shoot him at all. In Wisconsin, defendant Timothy Hausschultz returns to court this hour for a final pretrial hearing in the extreme punishment murder trial. The judge last week rejected a plea deal, opening statements at this point set for tomorrow. We'll keep our eye on that. But right now, let's head back to Texas for the closing arguments in the Benjamin Elliott case. We're going to pick it up right where we left off before the commercial break with the state's closing argument.
This is State's Exhibit number 100. You see where it says passwords? And I told you guys he's intelligent, right? I told you guys that in the opening statement. You see where it says passwords? He writes out his password, and he tells Deputy Munoz it's flash, FLASHR0X. And then in parentheses, in case there's any question about it and you're not sure what he wrote, he says, in alphanumeric. And then he gets to the other part of the consent form, the defects. And he asks Deputy Munoz, after stabbing his sister in the neck and being enamored by a knife, he gets to the device condition, and he asks, in the interviews and evidence, he asked Deputy Munoz, defects, device condition. The last time I used it, it was covered in blood. Do I put that here? No, Deputy Munoz says no, that's where you put the scratches. That's where you put the scratches. But you know that alphanumeric passcode, what's interesting about it is FLASHR0X is what he has to type in every time he unlocks his device. That tells you what his conscious objective or desire is. You heard Lieutenant Gray's testimony on that witness stand, okay? iPhone 6S, no Face ID. So every time he unlocks the phone, he's typing in FLASHR0X, or he's making sure he nails the fingerprint on the home button. Their own expert told you that would be highly unusual for somebody to be able to do while they're sleepwalking. Let's just talk about sleepwalking for a second. You know, and we had a lot of testimony about that on Friday. We did. Here's the issue with diagnosing Benjamin Elliott with anything, whether it's a sleep disorder, parasomnia, or it's a mental health issue. You would have to sit down and interview this man, and we all know he lies. You would have to believe every word that comes out of his mouth, and we know he lies. We know that because the data does not lie. At 11:57 p.m., he tells Deputy Munoz that he fell asleep at 2:33 a.m. At 11:57 p.m., that cell phone stays active until 4:17 a.m. He lied about what time he went to bed. And then in that window of time, he is unlocking the phone, FLASHR0X, or he's making sure he nails the fingerprint. And he's browsing YouTube, and he's browsing Reddit, and he's unplugging the device, and he's plugging it back in, and he's walking around his house and leaving his digital footprint all over that crime scene. And we know that he didn't go to bed that night. And you don't need a sleep expert to tell you that, because the alarm, the single most important piece of evidence in this case, at 4:28 p.m., the evening or afternoon before he stabs his sister in the neck, he sets an alarm. He told Deputy Munoz that he set his school alarm for 5:30 every day. He set an alarm at 4:28 p.m. the night before he stabs his sister. And at 4:01:02 a.m., he deactivates that alarm before it goes off. You don't need a sleep expert to tell you. When you deactivate an alarm, you don't plan on going back to bed. Especially not if you have to get up at 5:30 for school. The data does not lie. He does. So at 3:51 a.m., when he's done scrolling around Reddit, he gets on his phone. He types in FLASHR0X, or he just nails his fingerprint right on there, unlocks the device, goes to his timer and his stopwatch and his alarm application, and he deactivates that alarm, because we certainly don't want that waking anybody up. Same way we don't want Meghan's screams waking anybody up. And you know, we were talking about Amazon search history and survival kits and, you know, whether or not he deleted the searches. Look, it doesn't matter what he deleted. It's the fact that he's awake. He's going to his browser after he unlocks his phone, FLASHR0X, goes to his browsing and deletes them. He's awake. You don't need a sleep expert to tell you that. And you certainly don't need a sleep expert to tell you when he deactivates that alarm at 4:01 and he unplugs that device at 4:06, and at 4:08 He walks the exact distance there and back, and his phone records the steps he takes from his door to his sister's door to see if she's awake. He walks 9 feet in one direction and 9 feet back for a total of 18 feet at 4:08 a.m. He sets that phone down, and the reason why we don't see any activity on it after 4:17 is because he picks this up. And the last thing he remembers is a gargle or a half scream. The last thing he remembers is Meghan Elliott's last breath. She's the only person you didn't hear from in this court. She's the only one that didn't have a voice. But you know who does have a voice in this courtroom? The citizens of Harris County do. And when you walk out of this room and you walk back in here, in one voice, you will render one verdict and in one word: guilty.